Donald Trump has threatened a 50% tax on all imports from the European Union, as well as a 25% tariff on Apple products unless the company moves iPhone production to America. The steep tariffs would take effect from June the 1st, Trump announced in a post on Truth Social. Global stock markets dropped sharply following Trump's remarks, his latest use of tariff threats to influence international trade. The EU is already subject to 25% US tariffs on steel, aluminium and cars, along with reciprocal 10% duties on most other goods. That figure could rise to 20% if no agreement is reached before a 90-day deadline expires. Apple, which recently announced plans to expand manufacturing in India amid rising US-China tensions, was also threatened. Their relocation plans became a source of frustration for Trump, who brought it up last week during his Middle East trip.
The EU's Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, Maros Sefcovic, said the bloc is committed to securing a trade deal that works for both, and that is based on respect, not threats, after US President Trump threatened a 50% tax on all imports from the European Union. The EU's fully engaged, committed to securing a deal that works for both, EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic said after a call with US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. EU-US trade is unmatched and must be guided by mutual respect, not threats. We stand ready to defend our interests, he said. President Trump recommended Friday a 50% tariff on the European Union after complaining that negotiations were not going well and Brussels was difficult to deal with. Trump took to social media to share his thoughts, suggesting that the elevated duties should start on 1st June, in less than a month. The US president said he wants to charge higher import taxes on goods from the EU, a long-standing US ally, than from China, a geopolitical rival that had its tariffs cut to 30% this month, so Washington and Beijing could hold negotiations. Trump was upset by the lack of progress in trade talks with the EU, which has insisted on cutting tariffs to zero, even as the president has publicly insisted on preserving a baseline 10% tax on most imports. Our discussions with them are going nowhere, Trump posted on Truth Social. Therefore, I am recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union, starting on 1st June 2025. There is no tariff if the product is built or manufactured in the United States. Since mid-March, the Trump administration has imposed 25% tariffs on EU steel and aluminium, 25% on EU-made cars, and 10% on all EU imports. The 10% rate is supposed to remain in place until 8th of July, when Trump's 90-day negotiation window expires. Previously, the EU had offered a zero-tariff trade deal with the US, but Washington didn't accept that. As part of the current trade negotiations, the European Union and the United States have recently shared position papers that were radically apart, Euronews learned. Deep US frustration with the EU's approach. The US has recently agreed on a trade truce with China, leaving room to focus on the EU a bit more. Trump's demands appear to reflect deep US frustration with the EU's professional, calm, and bureaucratic approach to trade negotiations, clashing with Trump's willingness to quickly ink sexy-looking deals, even if they mean very little in practice. Agathe Desmarais from the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR, said, according to Desmarais, clarity is lacking around US trade goals. These could include a wide range of demands from the EU, from curbing its economic ties with China to pledges to buy more US LNG or weapons. The EU does not do trade deals in a few hours. This is simply not the way the bloc works, Desmarais explained, adding that a 50% tariff on the EU would be highly damaging for the US economy. In a recent interview with Euronews, EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic said EU standards on agriculture and food are not up for negotiation, after US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick last month criticized EU regulations preventing some US-made meat and chicken from entering the European market due to the use of hormones deemed unsafe by Brussels. The European Commission said that it stands ready to implement up to $95 billion in countermeasures if trade negotiations with the US fail to address the trade deficit. Meanwhile, the European Commission has recently lowered its economic forecast, assuming that the trade tariff on European goods imported by the US would be set at 10% for the long term. The latest forecast said that the GDP in the Eurozone is expected to grow by 0.9% and the EU economy to expand by 1.1% this year. Apple also threatened President Trump's post was preceded by a threat of import taxes against the U.S. tech giant Apple. Apple now joins Amazon, Walmart, and other major U.S. companies in the White House's crosshairs as they try to respond to the uncertainty and inflationary pressures unleashed by his tariffs. I have long ago informed Tim Cook of Apple that I expect their iPhones that will be sold in the United States of America will be manufactured and built in the United States, not India or any place else, Trump wrote. If that is not the case, a tariff of at least 25% must be paid by Apple to the U.S. In response to Trump's tariffs on Beijing, Apple and CEO Tim Cook were looking to shift iPhone manufacturing to India as the company adjusts its supply chains. That plan has become a source of frustration for Trump, who also brought it up last week during his Middle East trip. U.S. stock futures sold off after Trump's words on Friday, and the main European stock indexes also turned negative, losing between 1% to 2.5% by 3 p.m. CET. Like and subscribe for more.